Welcome to the Partis channel. Today we explain Prophets Isaiah chapter 1 in a clear and simple way, step by step. To truly grasp this incredibly powerful text, we first need to get our bearings and look at verses 1 through 9 to see exactly where we are in the story. So Isaiah receives this intense vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem, and it happens over the course of 4 different kings' reigns: Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. He kicks things off with what is basically a cosmic courtroom scene. It's dramatic. He calls the very heavens and the earth to act as witnesses. God speaks and says, "Children I have reared and brought up, but they have rebelled against me." The prophet then uses this brilliant everyday analogy, pointing out that even a simple ox knows who its owner is, but Israel, they just don't understand. The nation is then described as entirely battered. Picture someone who has been beaten from the sole of their foot right up to their head. There is no soundness left, literally nothing but bruises and open, untreated sores. Their land is completely desolate, devoured by foreigners, and left totally vulnerable, kind of like a flimsy temporary shelter sitting abandoned out in a vineyard. In fact, verse 9 drops a heavy truth on us. It tells us that if the Lord of hosts hadn't purposely left a tiny surviving remnant, they would have been completely wiped off the map, exactly like the ancient, notoriously wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah.
And moving right into verse 10, Isaiah actually seizes upon that exact comparison. He looks straight at the city's officials and directly addresses them as the rulers of Sodom and calls the citizens the people of Gomorrah. This forces us to confront a really provocative question right out of the gate. What actually happens when religious rituals are used to cover up social injustice? I mean, imagine a society for a second. The temples are absolutely packed, the holidays are celebrated perfectly down to the letter, and the religious rituals are performed flawlessly. But out on the streets, the legal system is entirely corrupt. Well, this is exactly the situation Isaiah is confronting. He is delivering a message straight from God to a people who genuinely think they are doing everything perfectly right, but they are actually missing the entire point.
So let's get into section 1, rejecting empty rituals. We're going to begin our step-by-step walkthrough by looking closely at the actual text. Let's start with verse 11 to see exactly how God reacts to this crazy situation of performing rituals without a pure heart. Right here in verse 11, God clearly states that he takes absolutely no delight in this endless river of animal blood if the people bringing the sacrifices are acting corruptly outside the temple. You have to understand, the people of Judah were bringing a massive multitude of sacrifices. We're talking rams, beautifully well-fed beasts, bullocks, and lambs. Now, in the ancient world, your wealth was literally measured in livestock. So these sacrifices, they were incredibly expensive. The people honestly thought that by bringing more and more physical, highly costly offerings to the temple, God would be super impressed by their devotion. But God's response is surprisingly blunt. He says, "I am full." He's had enough. He does not want their ritual animal sacrifices when their daily, everyday lives are just overflowing with wrongdoing.
Moving right into verse 12, God questions who even asked them to simply trample his courts, meaning they are just mindlessly going through the motions of religion. Notice that very specific, powerful word, trample. God doesn't view their visits to the temple as holy or careful or respectful. Because their hearts are corrupt, their presence is just heavy, thoughtless foot traffic ruining a sacred quiet space. They're just checking a box, treating God's courts like a place to simply be seen by others rather than a place of true, authentic spiritual connection.
Then in verse 13, the prophet delivers this incredibly heavy warning that God simply cannot endure the mixture of a solemn assembly with everyday iniquity and sin. Just listen to the end of that quote. God says, "I cannot endure iniquity along with the solemn assembly." This right here is the core tension of the entire chapter. You simply cannot have iniquity, which means gross, terrible injustice and wicked behavior sitting right alongside your beautiful, solemn religious gatherings like the Sabbath and the new moon festivals. The two just cannot mix. They repel each other.
Now notice the somewhat archaic word used here, oblations. This simply means religious offerings. But these are offerings that become completely vain or totally useless when the giver's daily actions are unjust. The people thought they could basically bribe God. They genuinely believed that if they did terrible, cutthroat things during the week, they could just bring an expensive oblation to the temple on the Sabbath and boom, the scales are balanced. But Isaiah makes it crystal clear. Without ethical behavior to back it up, those expensive gifts are entirely empty.
Verse 14 shows us just how exhausting this sheer hypocrisy is to God. These forced, empty holiday routines have literally become a wearisome burden to him. The language here is incredibly striking, right? God says, "My soul hateth these appointed seasons."
Think about that for a second. These were the very holidays that God himself commanded the people to keep in the first place. But because the people have completely stripped them of their moral meaning, they have become an exhausting burden. God is weary of the fake performances. And because of this, in verse 15, God declares something truly chilling. He says, "When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood." But he doesn't just leave them without hope. He gives them the actual solution in verses 16 through 20. He commands them to wash, to make themselves clean, to cease doing evil, and to learn to do good. He explicitly tells them to seek justice and to correct oppression. God even offers to sit down and reason with them, promising that though their sins are as glaring as scarlet, they shall be made as white as snow. But the flip side is a warning. If they refuse and continue to rebel, they will be eaten by the sword.
The core disconnect we're seeing here is just fascinating. The people were entirely focused on the external actions, right? The blood of bullocks, showing up for the new moons, bringing their expensive oblations. But God's actual requirement was an internal reality, a pure heart that is wholly dedicated to social justice and leaving behind iniquity. The rituals were only ever supposed to be an external reflection of that inward truth, definitely not a replacement for it.
That brings us to Section 2, the demand for justice. We're looking specifically at Isaiah 123. So what were the people of Jerusalem actually doing out in the streets and in the courtrooms that provoked such a massively strong rejection from God? Well, verses 21 and 22 set the stage perfectly, lamenting how the faithful city has become a harlot. Justice used to dwell there, but now it's full of murderers. The prophet says their fine silver has become dross, and their good wine is watered down. And this leads us straight into verse 23, where Isaiah points a finger directly at the corruption of the leaders. These leaders are completely ignoring the legal cases of the absolute most defenseless people in society. The prophet shifts his focus entirely away from the temple rituals and points straight at the civic leaders and the judges. In the ancient legal framework, a cause refers to a formal legal grievance or a lawsuit. These leaders are very clearly taking bribes and favoring the wealthy elites. Because of this, the causes and the legal rights of those who simply cannot afford to pay off the judges never even make it to a hearing.
To understand this simply, we have to look at the fatherless and the widow. They had absolutely no social power. So when judges ignored them, it was the ultimate glaring proof of a totally broken, corrupt system. In the ancient Near East, which was a deeply patriarchal society, your physical protection and your economic survival were directly tied to the adult men in your family. If you were an orphan or a widow, you were incredibly vulnerable. You were at risk of being robbed, having your family land stolen, or literally being sold into debt slavery. A society's true moral character was measured by how it treated these specific unprotected people. And Jerusalem's leaders, they were failing this test entirely.
So with the leaders failing this miserably to protect the vulnerable, we have to ask the obvious question: how is the city going to be fixed? Is God just going to destroy the city entirely, or is there a plan to heal it? Let's turn back to the text to see exactly what God declares he will do next. Welcome to Section 3, Purging the Corruption. This is all about God's intervention.
Interestingly, God responds to this gross injustice not with total sweeping destruction, but with a firm, decisive promise to clean up the leadership. Verse 24 kicks off God's intervention, declaring that he will take direct action against those corrupt leaders who've essentially made themselves his enemies through their injustice. Notice the specific, powerful Hebrew title used here, the Mighty One of Israel, or Avir Yisrael. This emphasizes immense, unstoppable strength. By using this title right before stepping in, God is showing his supreme power moving to defend the weak. By mistreating the vulnerable, these bribe-taking leaders haven't just broken a local civic law. They have positioned themselves as direct opponents of the Mighty One of Israel, and that is not a position you want to be in.
In verse 25, we read about God turning his hand to purge away thy dross as with lye. He's using a very specific historical image here. To fix the city, God is going to apply an intense, rigorous refining process. The society has become cheapened and corrupted, mixed with base, worthless elements that are ruining its value, just like the prophet mentioned earlier when he said their beautiful silver had become dross. Well, now God is going to do something about it.
The crucial point to grasp here is this simple blacksmith analogy. God is promising to act like a master metalworker, burning away the dross, which represents the corrupt leaders, to leave behind only a pure, just society. This imagery is incredibly powerful if you picture it. When you melt down raw metal, the impurities, the dross, they float right up to the top, and the silversmith skims them off. Sometimes they use a strong, harsh chemical substance like lye alongside intense heat to really speed up the cleansing process. God is saying that the coming judgment isn't meant to blindly wipe out the entire nation. It's a hot, targeted, intense fire meant to burn away the corrupt officials so the pure, valuable society underneath can finally survive and breathe.
Finally, in verse 26, the ultimate goal of this painful purging is revealed: to restore fair judges and righteous counselors so that Jerusalem can once again be called the city of righteousness. The refining fire has a beautiful, hopeful purpose. It clears the way for good, honest leaders who will actually protect the widow and the orphan. Once that true, street-level justice is restored, the city's reputation will change back to what it was always meant to be. The chapter then concludes in verses 27 through 31 by laying out the final results of this entire process. Zion shall be redeemed by justice, but the destruction of transgressors and sinners will happen together. Those who forsake the Lord will be consumed. Isaiah warns that the people will be ashamed of the sacred oaks and the idol gardens they chose over God. They will become like a withering, dying tree, and the corrupt strong man will become like tinder, burning right alongside his idol with absolutely no one there to put out the fire.
So looking back, this builds a very clear three-step process of restoration. Step 1 is recognizing the true enemies of society, the corrupt leaders. Step 2 is the difficult, often painful removal of those leaders, the purging of the dross. And step 3 is the ultimate goal, putting the right people back in charge so that real justice can thrive once again.
Let's move into section 4, practical life lessons. What is Isaiah's message for us today?
Now that we've walked through the ancient text, let's bring these words right into our everyday modern lives. What does Isaiah chapter 1 actually mean for us today when we obviously aren't literally offering rams in a temple? Well, we learn that going through the motions of religion means absolutely nothing if we aren't treating people fairly outside of those routines, especially those who are the most vulnerable. The modern applications of this are pretty striking. It challenges us to take a hard look at our own lives. Are we just checking boxes? Are we showing up to our places of worship or saying our prayers while totally ignoring the suffering of the people right in our own neighborhoods? The prophet is telling us clearly that our spiritual lives are validated entirely by how we treat the unprotected.
And that brings us to section 5, our recap and conclusion of Isaiah chapter 1. To quickly recap, Isaiah chapter 1 warns us that God entirely rejects sacrifices when they are mixed with sin, and he promises to purge corrupt leaders in order to restore true justice. We've seen how God is exhausted by hypocritical rituals. We've seen how fiercely he demands justice for the fatherless and the widow. And we've explored his powerful blacksmith analogy, promising to burn away the dross to leave behind a city of righteousness. Ultimately, God doesn't just want our rituals. He wants us to walk in righteousness by actively defending those who cannot defend themselves. Righteousness is true justice in action.
I want to leave you with this one thought to ponder as we close. If Isaiah were to walk into our modern society today, looking at both our religious routines and our legal systems, what exactly would he identify as our vain oblations? And who would he point out as the vulnerable people we are currently failing to protect? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.